Hello, and welcome to the Tavern Chat podcast. I'm your host, Eric Tenkar, and this is another of our Designers and Makers series of Fireside Chat. Today, I have Andrew from FASA Games. Andrew, welcome.
Greetings. Good to be here.
So now, if you're new to our Fireside Chats, they're very informal, but I do have a few questions I ask toward the beginning to kind of give us a background into our guest, and I'm going to do that right now. Andrew, how did you get into RPGs? What was the first RPG that you played?
Okay, first RPG I ever played was AD&D in the box set with the low impact dice that rounded off after about 3 games. This was back in 1979. I was still in high school.
Okay.
And yeah, that was a thing. That was we had T1 Village of Hamlet and a couple of other things. I had some Judges Guild supplements. And somehow, after just a few sessions of play, I ended up being the DM. And I'm still not sure quite how that happened, but apparently people liked me behind the screen, and I've been running games ever since.
Well, see, I found that I became a DM mostly because it's like that joke you always see in like military movies when they look for a volunteer to step forward, and everybody else in a platoon takes one step back, and one guy going, "What the hell?" That is kind of how I came into it. Not that I regret it at all. I did certainly learn because I was thrust into that. But yeah, it was pretty much because everybody wanted to play, but nobody wanted to sit behind the screen. So that's how I got it.
Yeah, been there. Been the guy left standing out there going, "Oh damn, I didn't step back quick enough, did I?"
Yep. Yeah. No, you didn't. No, you volunteered because not because you took a step forward, but because you didn't take one back. Yeah, you're in the front because everybody else retreated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So now, all right. So you started out with D&D, and of course those. We used to refer to them as the soap dice because they fell apart so quickly. But the only dice I think that I had that really could not stand up to the impact was the original dice from another TSR product, Top Secret. Because you had those soap dice, they were thrown into Gamma World and the basic set and all that stuff. And then Top Secret came out with these percentiles. I think mine were like a dark green and a dark red. But after rolling them for like a couple of game sessions, they started cracking. And dice shouldn't crack. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think people really quite understood at that point how much dice rolling was actually involved. I ended up mooching dice from other games. I have a couple of wooden dice that I used for playing MechWarrior for years and years because you need 2 6-sided dice, and it helps if they're different colors.
Okay.
And so one of them came from a board game that was 1940s. That was a World War II flying ace board game with these little cardboard planes you assembled and put up on plastic stands.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, found it in my grandmother's attic and played it a few times with friends. And then, of course, the thing had been in the attic for 50 some odd years, and it disintegrated pretty quickly once we started playing it.
Right.
But I kept the die out of that and the die out of another game, and so I ended up with these 2 wooden dice that I used for playing MechWarrior for, 10 years at least. I've still got those dice. They lasted.
Yeah, you're right. People don't realize that back at the start of this hobby, dice were like gold. You had your dice set. You might have had a second set that came in with the game that you bought. But if you could afford to buy a second set, I mean, that was amazing. Now we get dice by the pound. You didn't have that option back then.
Oh yeah, I've even got custom dice for different stuff now. I've got a one set that I use for GMing Earth Dawn, and then I've got a bunch of Q Workshop dice that I use for GMing 1879 that are their steampunk line with all the gears and crap on the dice. And then I've got a bag with, I think, 8 different sets of polyhedrals that are the loaner dice that I take to conventions, throw the bag out in the middle of the table, because there's always some guy that shows up at the table and forgot to bring dice.
Yeah, they forgot to bring dice, or they have like the smallest dice in the world that even they can't read. Whenever it just slows the game down. I've had that.
Or they're Shadowrun players and they bring a big cube of D6s and then they need polyhedrals.
Yeah, that's an issue. But yeah, we live in I guess in this era of gaming where finding dice is not an issue. My issue, I like the dice with all the cool designs on it, but I can never read them. It slows me down, especially as a GM. I guess as a player, I wouldn't mind rolling with like funky dice. But as a GM, you're rolling dice so often. You need dice that are easy to read and move on with. So
Well, that's one of the things I like about the Q Workshop steampunk dice. Yeah, they have the fancy little gears in the corners and so forth, but the numbers are big and clear.
see, that's good. That's hard to find. I hate to say it, but that's not the common way of doing things these days.
Oh, I've seen some really terrible dice designs. Ones where I had to put on my reading glasses and I pick them up and squint at them, and I'm still not sure what the heck that is. I mean, is that a 4 or is that a 9? What is that? I don't know.
See, like right now, my one little pet peeve is the D6s that have that special icon, because I wish they would be consistent as to what that special icon represented. Sometimes it's ones, sometimes it's 6, depending on I guess who designed the dice, and I find it really frustrating because you don't always know what the hell you're rolling.
Yeah, that's another thing there. And disclaimer: I have no pecuniary interest in Q Workshop. Long ago, they did the official Earth Dawn dice, but that contract lapsed like years ago, so there's no business relationship here. But I like their dice designs. Anytime they put a special icon on, it's always the maximum value on the die. They have a standard that they follow.
So that's good.
So if it comes up with the weird symbol, you know that the die has maxed out.
Because I'm looking at literally on because I actually got back into playing as a player, and it's been cool. And I've rolled my dice, and I grabbed my d6s, and I got my funky d6s. And out of the 5 dice, 3 of them substitute the ones for the special icon or the special graphic, and the other 2 substitute for the 6. And it's like, I don't know if rolling the icon is good or bad.
The nice thing about standards is that there are so many to choose from.
True, that's no longer standard to some extent. It's like, which standard is your standard?
Yeah, it's an old IT joke. You start dealing with connectivity protocols and data formats and so forth, and that it's a very sarcastic joke.
No, I am sure. Well, what is your current go-to RPG system then? I know you have some systems that are in-house with FASA. But what's the one that you feel most comfortable with?
The one that I built. I mean, I'm line developer for 1879. It's the steampunk sequel to Earth Dawn. It replaces Shadowrun in the FASA cosmology because, we sold Shadowrun off years and years ago.
Right.
I know 1879 inside out and backwards because I'm the line developer. I wrote a big chunk of the game. I'm very comfortable running it and would have no problem running it at the drop of a hat. I've got a bunch of pre-written demos. I've been running a sandbox campaign of it for a while. Beyond that, I've been running Earth Dawn for over 25 years.
Wow.
So I started running Earth Dawn when the Three Flyers came out. A friend of mine, a guy by the name of William Tracy, who was at the time writing for Shadowrun, got some stuff in his goodie box. Now, for those of you who don't remember the goodie boxes, FASA, like several other companies, would send out a goodie box every quarter to all their writers containing all the products that had come out that quarter.
Oh, wow.
So, once you sold something to FASA, every 3 months you got a box with all the new products, whether it was the line you were writing for or not. William came over one day with these 3 flyers and was like, this was in my goodie box, and I'm not into this sword and sorcery thing. Let me give this to you guys. And we ran the demo scenario that was in the 3 flyers and were like instantly hooked. The next quarter, William showed up with the first edition rule book, and I've been running the game ever since. I started writing for it, and that's what got me in with FASA.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I have somewhere in my, I think it's in my top shelf of my closet, I still have the first edition of Earth Dawn, first edition of Shadowrun. I ran them. Oh my God, must be back in my early college days.
Yeah, that was late 80s, early 90s when those came out. Earth Dawn was 1993, if I recall correctly.
Okay, so Earth Dawn then would have been. I ran a few sessions of that shortly. I stopped gaming in March of '97 when I was when I was no longer an individual that had weekends off, but when I was somebody who now was like Wednesday, Thursday was my weekend. So, oh yeah, well,
that's not conducive.
Wednesday, Thursday was your weekend, and it was 5:30 p.m. to 2 a.m. So it wasn't even conducive like on the weekends to get people over, because really, who wants to come over your house at 10 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so go ahead.
Closest I've ever had to that was when we were living in Chicago. We had our Earth Dawn campaign had grown massively. At one point, we actually had 14 players. That wow. Got to be an interesting job of management. A couple of the players would show up Friday night. So a few of the other players would show up Saturday morning, and they do all the house cleaning and getting the place ready for gaming while I was doing game prep. People would start showing up around noon and bringing food, because we'd always do a potluck buffet type of thing with that many people. I'd whip something together. People would bring all sorts of stuff, and we would start gaming about 3 in the afternoon and probably wrap up about 1 in the morning.
Wow.
And we'd end up with a couple of gamers sacked out on our couch and going home Sunday. And I miss those days. I really do. Where we would do this like every weekend.
Oh yeah, I miss the days where, heck, when I was in college and you were mostly off. You had your part-time job you were still doing, but you were mostly off during the summertime, and you were gaming 4-5 days. It was good time, and you never got tired of it back then, man. It wasn't like you didn't leave it exhausted. You left it like, all right, well, we're gonna pick this back up tomorrow at noon, right? Now here I am, I don't know, 30 years later, and I'm finally getting back into a regular game using Roll20 as a player. Actually, 2 regular games after only running stuff at conventions for about a year and a half.
I've got 3 campaigns going. They're all on hiatus right now because all my cycles are going into finding a new day job.
Ouch.
Once that gets sorted, then we'll pick them back up. One is an Earthdawn campaign that's actually been going for 26 years.
Holy shit.
It has its own wiki.
That's impressive.
My wife has, and this is according to FASA, before I became line developer of 1879, back when I was just a freelancer. According to FASA, my wife's character is the longest running player character in the game system. Because she built her character from the 3 flyers and has been playing that character continuously for over 26 years.
Damn. That's impressive.
The other 2 campaigns I have are 1879. One is a sandbox that's taking place in the Grosvenor world on the far side of the wormhole from Earth. And the other one is taking place in London and is a playthrough of one of our modules, Big Trouble in Little Soho.
Cool.
So once I can get my head back into GMing, those will all 3 pick back up. And they'll run in every 2 weeks, and there's a staggered schedule for them.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Well, one of the games I'm in is, excuse me, every Monday, and the other one is every other Sunday. So that's probably the maximum that I can actually find time to do, and still keep all the other balls you got to juggle in real life going. So,
oh yeah.
All right. Well, here, and because you started out with D&D, I'm going to throw this out there at you. Save or die. And I'm talking about the idea that there can be a mechanic in your game that no matter how powerful your PCs are, that there's something that can kill them outright based on a roll of just a single die roll. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't like it. There are points where things can hinge on a die roll, whether the character survives or not, but it needs to have built up to that. It doesn't. Characters are not pop-up targets. You know?
Fair enough.
I don't like killing player characters. I will never save a player from themselves. If they do something stupid and their character ends up dead, that's their problem, not mine. But at the same time, I'm not going to just roll one die and say, okay, here's a blank character sheet, too bad, so sad. That's really high-handed on the part of the GM. It's high-handed on the part of the system. I lost a MechWarrior character on a single die roll years ago, but that was the culmination of a series of circumstances. The character made a bad decision on the battlefield, left his armored vehicle and took a wild risk. It went badly, got really badly injured, and then came up to a point where there was this die roll to see if the medics could pull the character through. And that die roll down ended. At that point, okay, I'm good with this because it built up to it. You know, that die roll wasn't just a pop-up, it was the pivotal moment of a culmination of circumstances.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a perspective, too, that I haven't seen on it yet, either. So that's good.
I'm a storyteller. I don't do hex crawls. I don't do dungeon crawls. I do procedurals. I do intrigue. I do social conflict. I like doing sandbox campaigns. I want the story to keep going. if there's a booby trap in there that's going to result in a blank character sheet, the players are going to get kind of cautious. They're not going to be willing to take the risks that make the big stories and the big drama.
You kind of take away the heroic aspect, I guess.
To some extent, the players are less inclined to try to be heroic because of that chance that, there's that, booby trap die roll that, we could hit that save or die moment. You want to be careful so that you don't have to build another character. That, or you just don't get attached to your characters. I mean, if you're playing Rifts, you go into Rifts with 3 characters built.
I'm laughing because that is very much true. You're already thinking about what you're going to play next when you're playing Rifts, because
the system in the world are lethal. Rifts has not given a crap about game balance since its inception. And you've got a system where you can have Robin Hood next to a glitter boy.
Yep.
So, if you're going into that kind of a system, all right, you've already accepted the risk here. But if you're in a system that is designed for heroic action, like Earthdawn is pivoted on the idea of the player characters becoming great heroes. You can't become a great hero if there's a step and die in there somewhere.
Yeah. And, I think part of it is, too, the system. Like you're saying, Earthdawn, your players are expected to become great heroes. It's different than, I don't know, OD&D, where roll 3d6 in order and play what you got. You didn't really get attached to that much. But when you're playing something that has a long-term implications, save or die becomes much more of an issue. And not only because of campaign issues, but in a game like Pathfinder, where it can take you a serious amount of time to put your new character together. Especially, God forbid, the DM allows you to start at greater than first level. It becomes a chore. So character death has certainly a larger impact in a game like that than on something like, I don't know, like I said, OD&D or Swords and Wizardry, where you can roll up a character and be going in 10 minutes or less.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever played MERPs?
I loved playing MERPs, and I even used to bring in the critical charts from the full Rollmaster rules, which probably wasn't the best thing for my players.
Yeah, but the critical fumble charts are hysterical.
They are great, and here we're gonna go. I guess we're gonna free range a little bit because this has probably never come up, but at least not in a prior one of these firesides. But when it comes to critical hits and critical fumbles, they fuck with the players more than they will ever give the players a benefit, and they don't realize it because they just see the shinies.
Oh yeah.
I used to, as a DM, I used to love it. My players love merch, but they hated the result where it's like, okay, what was it, 66 was always like a horrible, like, death blow, or crippling blow, and they're like, but they loved it when they inflicted it, but when it came back to them,
it's only fair if the enemy gets to return fire.
and I totally agree. But like you were saying before about pop up targets, when you're playing RPGs, the players are expected to continue. The PCs are expected to be a continuing storyline, continuing characters, and their adversaries, with some exceptions, the big bad evil guys, are expected to fall, and be, they're pop up targets. When your pop up target gets critical, it doesn't affect the next scene, doesn't affect the next encounter, but your PC has negative 15 on their percentile rolls because of a gaseous wound that they just, a horrible wound they just took. That has a long-term effect.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, we love Murphs, man. I killed I killed a whole party with bolas one time. Those things were nasty when taken against people. My players were like, "I want to buy a bola for my next character."
Yeah. Yeah. The problem with MERPs, trying to build an advanced level character took a spreadsheet because you had to do all the progressions, and man, that was a pain to do.
Well, especially because we didn't have. I mean, in early MERP days, you didn't really have access to. Most of us didn't have access to computers, let alone spreadsheets. I don't think my Coleco Adam would have done a spreadsheet if I wanted it to. But,
yeah, there were advantages to playing with a bunch of IT people.
Okay. You see, you guys had the only advantage I had growing up with my father worked for the phone company, which meant that he had access to a photocopier. So all my goldenrod sheets were. I had like 100 copies of each of the AD&D character sheets that were photocopied, and you couldn't. Back then, if you wanted to go to some place to get photocopies, they were, I don't know, 10 cents a piece, sometimes 15 cents a copy. It wasn't like now where you can print stuff at home.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the other problem with MERPs too was the magic system. It didn't fit the setting, which was
it was the Rollmaster magic system, and it was it always felt like it was shoehorned into Middle Earth. The Middle Earth's magic just didn't work that way.
No, and especially when certain like like the Ranger class is getting what was it, essence and channeling spells, access, and it's just like I don't remember any of I don't remember that being done. The elves had magic, certain, but no. But,
the Rangers under Aragorn were not spellcasters.
No. No, they
that's
were not.
one thing. That's one thing we've done with the FASA systems is we've made sure that the mechanics are integrated with the game world, so that it all fits together. That's been a thing since the early days of Shadowrun and Earthdawn, and now with 1879, where you're dealing with the return of magic in the Victorian era. That's been all sorts of fun.
Well, that's cool.
We've been using late 19th century occultism as the basis for a bunch of stuff. So if you've ever read Eliphas Levi, you're going to spot some of his theories showing up in the game system.
Well, I haven't read them, but I might have to do a little Google research on this because that sounds interesting.
The upcoming Player's Companion actually builds up the Theosophical Society as a playable mage organization. So you can play a Theosophist.
Oh, man, and it's a great era. It's a great time frame to pull from. There's a lot of stuff going on there.
Oh, yeah. We picked the year 1879 as the start point for the player entry because of all the stuff that was going on there. You've got so much happening. There's the Theosophical Society that's come up. You've got the independence movement really starting to get going in India. You've got the Boer Wars about to happen. You've got the great game going on between Britain and Russia. So you've got this whole intelligence Cold War thing going on. All sorts of stuff.
You're talking to somebody who was a history major, so yeah. And I might have to pick it up just for the historical references and enjoying what's going on. I always love that the what if histories. This
is very much a game for history nerds. We realized early on what sort of people were coming to our demo tables. We had people with PhDs in history coming to our demo tables. and we're like,
Wow.
okay, this is the game for the history nerds. We're going to lean into that. It's funny you should say "What If" because I've actually got Robert Cowley's collected "What If" on my reference shelf here.
Mm.
I don't know if you've read any of his books.
I haven't, but I've heard of them. So
Yeah, for the listeners, the "What If" series, edited by Robert Cowley, is a series of essays by actual historians, people with degrees in this stuff, where they will take a particular event and go, well, what if it went a little differently? What if the Confederacy took the high ground at Gettysburg? What if this particular battle was lost by the Persians? What if the Tanzimat reforms happened 100 years earlier in the Ottoman Empire? So on and so forth. And it goes through laying out the evidence for the conclusions they've drawn and then projecting, well, this is what this particular historian believes would have happened if things had gone that direction.
no, that's good stuff. That is, when
That's
you
the
think
found.
of. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you.
Now, that's the foundation of the product line. 1879 is all based on a series of what ifs, building an alternate history, and then throwing in that one piece of major weirdness and having magic return in 1877.
Well, that is exciting, and that sounds really good. I still have. Was it 1880? Was it 1889? The Game Designer Workshop.
Space 1889, where
9.
the
Yep.
Brits were sailing ether ships to Mars.
Yeah. I enjoyed that one even because it was historical yet uh, again the what if history and taking it to the next step. And I've always enjoyed them even if I don't get a chance to play them. I always enjoy the settings because they really spark my imagination. Because I've done my own what ifs about certain instances in history, whether it goes back to the Middle Ages or World War II, which were my two main focuses when I was doing my BA in history. It's always intrigued me. I always like to see these alternate, was the Harry Turtledove books and all that stuff.
Oh,
Where
Guns of
we
the
would be,
South.
yeah. What would happen if you just changed one moment in history? Where would the time stream break off? And a good alternate historical RPG does a great job of that. If you can look at Time Master, which just can't be time of it, but
Hmm.
uh, I also enjoyed that back in the day. Let my players screw up with the timeline, but that was more camp, I think, than anything else for us. All right, well, I got one more question for you before we literally hit the sandbox, but we think we've been doing that already, which is fine. But all right, so you came into gaming RPGs in high school. So what would the teenage you think if they could see where you are in the hobby today, what you've accomplished within it? What would they think?
How did it take so damn long? I mean, really, seriously, it took you this many years to get there? Dude.
Well, I think that happens with a lot of us.
You know, teenage me did not have the patience, and it sometimes amazes me that I've managed to stick with this and put in the work, because getting to the point where I am running a product line for a game company has taken a lot of effort. People talk about paying your dues. Yeah, and as old Jack Burton said, that check is in the mail.
My son, when he turned 25 last year, complained to me that he was 25 and he should be able to achieve his dreams. And I flat out looked at him and said, "Dude, I'm 50."
Hmm.
I go, and when I was 25, I wanted to be in a position to do what I'm doing now. And I only got to start doing it like a year prior. So I go, you got about 25 years to go before you can really start complaining. You got to pay your dues and work for it. When I was in my young 20s, I was designing games. I was designing, uh, like, I had a dungeon board game using index cards to do math, and I was working out mechanics. And yeah, you have these great ideas. But then again, in late 80s, early 90s, there was no self-publishing. You weren't going to get that out on Drive Through RPG to be able to print at home. None of that
Hmm.
stuff. And real life work, schooling, family uh, takes up a lot of that time, that formative time. So
Yeah.
anybody who can start making well, now you can. Now you can make an impact on a hobby because of self-publishing a lot earlier than you could have in our younger days. But
Hmm.
anybody who can make I guess at this point would be can make a living off this hobby uh, before you're 30. God bless you. Because you've achieved that almost unachievable goal, and that's awesome. But I think for most of us, we have to wait to we get to our later years when things start calming down. Hopefully,
Hmm.
we can do stuff like this.
Or you get a lucky break and you, in your younger years, manage to get in with a company like Paizo or WotC as a junior scut worker,
Yep.
shoveling the crap out of the stables for a few years and work your way up into the position that you're after. But even then, there's that shoveling that has to be done. Musicians talk about 10,000 hours. If you are really serious about your art and you want to be first chair in your section, it takes 10,000 hours of practice. You put in that time in order to develop the skill and develop your craft to the point where you are worthy of that seat.
It it, it takes practice. It takes dedication. And to a large extent, it takes some inner skills that you were born with to some extent, or you're predisposed toward. You know, I guess you can teach anybody to learn art, but not everybody can be an artist. That's a gift.
There's it sounds arrogant, but yeah, there is that spark that differentiates the big names from the average names. Not everybody is going to be a Monty Cook. I could put in my 10,000 hours. I will never be Monty Cook. I will
Right.
never be on that level.
But you will achieve a certain level because you might not have that, or whatever Monty has, that little extra that he was probably born with on that creative side. But you should be able to learn to do more than serviceable work in it. But you won't be the one like in Spinal Tap where, it goes to 11. Why?
Hmm.
Because 11's louder than 10, but just make 10 louder. No, this goes to 11. It's a similar concept. There's certain people that can take their craft to 11, and that's a God-given gift, in my opinion.
I look at it as finding my niche. It has taken me a while to find my niche, but I landed on this steampunk system. FASA was just starting to put together the idea for it. I'd been freelancing for FASA for years, and Mark Stout, who at the time was line developer for both Blue Planet and for the new product 1879, came to me and said, look, I need a world builder. I need somebody to start really putting together the game world. And so we started into it, and there came a point where I'd written something like 100,000 words for the game world of detailing the countries of Earth and building out the settlements of Grosvenor World and this and that and the other. And Marx said, you know what, I want to narrow my focus down. Trying to run 2 product lines is way too much, and I'm not into this steampunk thing. And so Ross Babcock offered me the position, said, do you want to join FASA? I'm like, hell yes, I want to join FASA. And I took over as line developer and built it out from there. But, I found a niche where my interest in alternate history and the storytelling thing that I do and the world building thing I do all kind of came together. I may never do multiple disparate product lines with different mechanics and all the way Cook does, but I've got a product line that I'm proud of. And, that's good enough.
Well, and you put the time in before. It wasn't like they said, hey, let's go with this total unknown who has no track record and give him this IP to play with. You had a proven track record. You put in the work. And you were in the right place at the right time.
Combination of factors there, yeah. I had already published a lot of stuff for Earthdawn, some stuff for Shadowrun. I did some stuff for Mage the Ascension, did some stuff for a couple of other systems here and there, a couple of independent projects. And then did a bunch of the world building for 1879 before they offered me the product line. So, yeah, right place, right time, but also having that track record. You really got to think about that. You're not going to get anywhere without doing that work. This keeps coming back to that. Keeps looping back to needing to do the work to get there. Pablo Picasso was not selling his early paintings for $1 million.
Nope. And it applies to, I've seen people, new bloggers even, complain that they're not getting enough, readers. Why don't I'm not getting an audience. And it's like, I've been doing this for 10 years. It took me 10 years to build up to where I'm at now. It doesn't come overnight to most of us. Most of us, have to work to get to where we're at, whatever it is in our hobby. For me, the right place and the right time was when I pitched the idea of an OSR old school rule set I could maybe do on a single sheet, double-sided, to be an introduction to old school gaming and RPGs in general. And I pitched that to Zach Glazer at Frog God Games. And next thing I know, I'm being tasked with writing Swords and Wizardry Light, being given 4 pages, but bringing a rule set of, I don't know, Sword of Wizardry Complete with over 120 pages down to 4 and still keep it true to its core. But I was already known to Frog God Games otherwise, and they knew the blog and they knew some of my abilities. And by doing that one little project, now I get to represent them at conventions and run games for them and help work the table and get an insight into what else is going on within the company. But I wouldn't have had that if I didn't have those 10 years of refining my written craft, even though it was only on a blog. But I was refining it during that time. That doesn't. You got to put your work in, like you said.
Blogs are relentless. Once you set a schedule, that's got to go out. I do a weekly blog for 1879. If you go over to FASAgames.com, there's 3 years worth of a weekly blog for 1879. I've never had a skip week in all that time. And when you've got to churn out 1,000 words, 2,000 words, and have these in the can so that they're ready to publish, I like to stay 3 or 4 blog entries ahead and have them already in the can. You're cranking out at minimum 2,000 words a week just to keep up with the blog. That's going to give you a lot of practice right there.
Yeah, I think at this point I have not missed a day of posting in for 5 years. And I don't do posts. I don't have anything. Nothing's in the hopper, so everything is done on a daily basis, even when I'm at conventions, which is stupidly ridiculous on my part. And even this podcast is, I don't know, 10.5 months of daily episodes. Again, I don't. The most I do is some of these firesides get recorded in advance, especially when I get a lot of them back to back. But otherwise, it's a daily responsibility. But I enjoy it. Number one, and my community expects it. So as long as I can keep cranking it out on the schedule that they are used to, I will continue to do so.
It's the people who take it seriously like that, I think, that succeed, partially because they take it seriously. You look at Ursula Vernon. Ursula Vernon started out doing furry art and doing these oddball web comics, and then she started doing Digger, and she took it seriously. It was a webcomic that she was putting up. Nobody was paying her for it. But she made a commitment to a publishing schedule, and she took it seriously. She treated it like work. She treated it professionally. And she won a Hugo for it.
Wow.
The first collected volume of Digger, she took a Hugo for that. She's now a successful writer and author and artist. She's got a couple of book series out. She did this children's book series called Dragon Breath, about this young dragon trying to deal with various problems that most kids are going to have, except he's also a dragon. And she's done a bunch of these oddball fairy tale books. Her take on the Bluebeard story is freaking amazing.
Really?
It's this. She takes these very down-to-earth, very practical characters, and she puts them in these screwed-up situations. The main character in the Bluebeard story, and I'm blanking on the title of the book. I've got it on my shelf, and I can't remember the damn title. The main character is the daughter of a miller, and this baron comes to her father and says, "I want to marry your daughter." And the miller's like, "Sure," because first off, the baron is going to drop a pretty nice dowry on the family, and secondly, when the local baron says, "I want to do this thing," the guy who runs the flour mill isn't going to say no to the baron. The girl, meanwhile, is like, "There's something fishy going on here." Because barons do not marry peasant girls.
True.
there is something screwy going on here. I mean, she knows that from page one, there is something wrong here. A miller's daughter does not marry a baron. This just doesn't happen. So she goes into this trying to figure out what is going on and just deals with all this weirdness along the way. And the character really makes the story. The fact that she's such a practical, down-to-earth character really makes the story. But Vernon took her work seriously from the outset. She made the commitment. She kept that webcomic going, and the couple of times where she had to have a delay, it was because she was moving across the country. And then she did a full-page cartoon of the main character from the comic trying to load all her crap into a truck.
Nice.
So yeah, the hobby itself is all about fun. You know, we tell these stories for our entertainment, and there's some critical functions that this hobby performs, and I sort of want to touch on that before we're moving on. That, you know, the hobby itself is bringing back a skill that in Western culture we've almost lost, and that is the ability to tell our own stories. Because we've been telling our own stories for entertainment since we learned how to build a fire and sit around it. But in Europe and in America, we've kind of lost that. We weren't doing it. We go to movies, we read mass market paperbacks. Role gaming has brought that ability to tell our own stories back. So it has brought this entertainment to us, and it is there for our enjoyment. But to produce it, you have to take it seriously.
Definitely. I mean, that's.
And I mean, let me get off my soapbox here, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
And you can learn the art of storytelling or GMing, and there are tricks to it that will keep your game running at a pleasant pace, that all your players are engaged. And this whole argument I know about whether role-playing games should be more about the story or more about the I guess the emerging story of what your players are doing, as opposed to an overarching story. But in the long run, it doesn't matter. It's what works best at your table. You got to know your players, and the way you run a game at a convention is not how you're going to run a game at home. Because your convention, you got constrained by time. You got to make sure if you're telling a story, it gets from beginning to end, and you might have to adjust things as the game goes on to make sure your players experience what they're supposed to experience and have a good time doing so. Because if you are a GM, yes, part of your responsibility, in my opinion, is to keep your players engaged and entertained, especially with all the distractions this world has now.
Yeah, trying to get people to do something that is personally engaging for 3 hours or 6 hours or however long, that's just not something we do as much, unless you're part of a sports team or then actually playing the game and not sitting in the stands cheering the team on. We just don't engage like that with each other as much as I think we really ought to.
Well, and I think part of that is we are so connected to social media via our phones, our tablets, whatever, and these things are with us all the time, that even at situations where we are sitting down for a game or at a convention, if you don't keep your players engaged, somebody is going to be having that phone just under the lip of the table, looking up whatever. And that's why when I run convention games, I am more concerned about the pacing and keeping my players moving and engaged than I am if I'm running it for my friends, because it's it's a different setting, it's a different expectation, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a different. Basically it's using different skills as a storyteller. You know, you can't run the game the same way for your home group as you would for a convention group, because you're going to do a disservice to one group or the other depending on what you're doing.
Yep. Like in my sandbox campaign, they one character may end up with the spotlight for the majority of the session. The last session I ran right before we went on hiatus, the shaman from the Sarid tribe ended up with the spotlight for a great deal of the session because of the situation they were in. She had a couple of things that she had to look into and was pivotal to the storyline at that point. And the other players were more or less being supporting roles for most of the session. And that's okay for a sandbox campaign that I'm running at home. Next session,
Right.
somebody else will end up with the spotlight. It'll move around. But at a convention, that spotlight's got to click along. It's got to move from player to player. And everybody has to have their turn center stage. Each player, at least once during the session, has to be the most important person at the table.
Yeah, you are right about that. And that takes, you can learn that skill as a GM. It's not something that you need to know innately. It's not something you just have to make sure that you keep everybody engaged at some point. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, when you see that player that's losing focus, you can always find a way to grab them right back in. You don't need dice to decide what's going to happen. Sometimes you can say, "Oh, who's not being very attentive? All right, well, they're being inattentive now. They're being inattentive as a PC. So, who might get surprised?"
Yeah, who did the enemy just get around behind? Hey, you, roll initiative.
Yeah, there's always a way to work it in. Well, man, Andrew, this hour has gone by in like a blink of an eye.
Hmm.
That's holy crap.
Yep.
Listen. You got any links that we need to tell the audience about? And oh, by the way, what's coming up from FASA?
Well, let me throw a couple of things in here and briefly discuss what I'm tossing in. I'm just going to throw these links into the
Yeah,
Fireside Chat.
and I can add them. I'll add them to the show notes when the show goes live.
So, we'll give you the homepage for 1879 at FASA Games, and we'll also give you the shop page for it. So if you go over to the FASA Games store, that's where you can get our products. And I'm also going to throw in a link over to my personal Patreon, The Wandering Beekeeper. I'm doing this side project where I'm developing a new mechanic and a new game world in public.
Cool.
And inviting people to actually participate in that development process. Right now, the patrons are discussing the dice mechanic with me and what the dice mechanic is actually going to look like. So I'm kind of, the patrons are for this have become part of the development team to create this new system.
That's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, it's a thing I've been thinking about doing for a while, and I finally decided, you know what? Quit thinking about it and do it. There's this thing Richard Branson keeps saying, screw it, let's do it. And Richard Branson must have some idea what he's doing. He's become tremendously wealthy with that philosophy.
Damn straight.
Must have some idea. So, there's a few links there of my side project and the FASA Games Store and the page for 1879 and what's coming up. We just delivered the Elven Nations sourcebook for Earth Dawn 4th edition, and that closes out the 4th edition Kickstarter. It has been several years. It took way longer than we thought it would. Our apologies, but we have delivered the last book and we have closed out the Kickstarter successfully. Everything has been delivered as promised. So we are now bringing out, working on the new stuff post Kickstarter. Earth Dawn will be having source books for the city-state of Iapos, which is one of the big bad guys in Earth Dawn. It's a militant plutocracy run by a family that is descended from a dragon. They've got some mind control spells that they're using to keep hold on the populace, and yeah, they're just nasty people. We're also doing some further expansion outside the original game area of the province of Barsave. We're bringing out a book for the province of Arancia that delves into the deep history of France and the legends of the... Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Delves into Gaulish legend and really the deep mythology of that part of the world. Looking at the legendary background of France and that area, and it's written by a French author. One of the things that we do at FASA is regional source books are normally written by someone native to that region. We've been doing this since Shadowrun. Like Deutschland im Schatten, the Germany source book for Shadowrun was written by a German author and then translated to English.
That works. Nice.
So we've got a number of things coming out. We've also got the Mystic Paths book for Earth Dawn coming up. That's going to delve into variants on the disciplines and some of the racial disciplines that will become paths that your character can follow in addition to your character class. 1879, we have the Players and Game Masters Guide out and the London Source book, an adventure book out. Coming up next for 1879 is the Player's Companion and the GM's Companion, and those are going to open the toolbox. We want to make the game user expandable, and so the Players and GM's Companions will include the mechanics for building your own spells, creating your own character professions, building your own creatures, designing your own magical lodges, so on and so forth. They'll give you a whole toolbox to expand the game world within your own campaign, giving the players a lot more control and agency over what they're playing. Beyond that, the next regional source book for 1879 will be Fort Ellis, which is the primary British stronghold on the far side of the wormhole in the Grosvenor world. So we'll be looking at the Grub itself and at how the Earth presence has shifted the balance of power and shifted the ecology and so forth as British colonialism comes riding in roughshod over this land that had a stalemate between two major powers, and the Brits have kicked that over like an anthill. Just blundering right into the middle of this thing without having a clue about it, and they're right in between two powers that were at war 1,000 years ago, and the Brits are now in the no man's land. Yeah.
You're pitching something that sounds like a lot of fun. That
I'm
is
sorry, you
cool.
cut off there?
Sorry, you're pitching something that sounds like a lot of fun to read.
I certainly hope so. The books themselves are loaded up with historical allusions and 19th century pop culture Easter eggs and all sorts of stuff. It very much is a game for history.